The fluorescent lights of a local grocery store hum overhead. It is a Tuesday evening. Two customers stand in line. The first customer, wearing work boots and paying with faded $20 bills, buys $75 worth of groceries. The second customer, wearing a tailored suit, taps a heavy metallic Visa Infinite card on the glass terminal for the exact same items. The terminal beeps. Green checkmark. Transaction approved. Both customers walk out. On the surface, it looks like an egalitarian system of modern commerce. But zoom in on the accounting ledger of that specific cash register. The cash-paying worker just unknowingly subsidized the first-class airline tickets of the executive. The central contradiction of the American payment network is that it markets itself as an engine of free consumer rewards, while operating mathematically as a highly regressive, privately engineered tax on the poorest stratum of the population. The cashback you celebrate is entirely funded by an invisible 2 to 3% price inflation applied to all goods across the entire economy. The metallic card strikes the counter with an audible, heavy thud. How exactly does a piece of metal extract wealth from cash? Picture the transaction as a high-stakes negotiation disguised as a fraction of a second. The cashier says the total is $100. The executive hands over the card. The issuing bank whispers to the merchant, "We will guarantee this payment, but we are keeping $3 as a toll. You get $97. The merchant says, "That destroys my entire profit margin. I cannot accept this." The bank replies, "You have to. It is in the contract. And if you tell the customer about the toll, we will shut down your terminals entirely." That is the reality of the ecosystem. If you want to understand the mechanical truth behind the systems that govern your money, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Capital Curriculum. We dismantle the financial machinery hiding in plain sight. Because right now, the average cash-using household pays an extra $149 annually in inflated retail prices, purely to subsidize the card networks. The system mathematically guarantees that the poorest consumers pay a premium so the wealthiest consumers can travel for free. To understand the extortion, you must map the four-party model. The general public assumes that when they swipe a Visa card, Visa gets the money. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of network economics. Visa and Mastercard do not issue cards, nor do they extend credit. They are simply toll operators maintaining the digital roads. The system operates strictly between four players: the consumer, the issuing bank, the merchant, and the merchant's acquiring bank. When the terminal flashes approved, the missing $3 from that $100 purchase is called the merchant discount rate. It is surgically spliced into three distinct streams before the sun even sets. The lion's share, roughly 2.2% plus 10 cents, is the interchange fee. This goes directly back to the issuing bank to fund the consumer's cashback and cover credit risk. Another fraction goes to the merchant's processing company. Finally, a 0.15% network assessment goes directly to Visa for the privilege of using their messaging standard. The capital is drained instantly. By the time the acquirer deposits $97.10 into the merchant's depository account at midnight, a systemic wealth transfer has occurred. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston quantified this exact transfer mechanism. According to their landmark quantitative study, the average credit card-using household receives $1,133 in rewards. When you subtract the hidden inflation, this results in a net invisible transfer of over $1,282 per household, moving bottom-up across the socioeconomic ladder every single year. Visa and Mastercard command market capitalizations of roughly $560 billion and $440 billion respectively. These astronomical valuations are entirely predicated on their ability to enforce legal gags that prevent merchants from telling consumers how much a swipe actually costs. In standard financial collapses, executives face federal indictment. But in this ecosystem, no one goes to prison. Because the perfect financial extraction mechanism was legalized exactly 54 years ago. The origin of this mandate traces back to a single room in California. October 25th, 1970. A sterile, smoke-filled conference room at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, California. The air conditioning struggles against the heat of a dozen competing regional bank presidents shouting over jurisdictional lines. Ashtrays overflow onto mahogany tables. National Bank Americard Incorporated, the entity that would later become Visa, is being formed. At the front of the room stands D. Hock, a banking executive with a vision for a decentralized, unified financial web. He watches the bankers argue over proprietary, fractured charge cards that lose money at every turn. Hock steps to the whiteboard. He understands a brutal truth about payment infrastructure. A network is only valuable if it is ubiquitous. He begins drawing lines connecting independent banks into a single cohesive clearinghouse. Hock later described the banking cartel's mentality at that time as an exercise in institutional ego, a multi-billion-dollar business that no one could comprehend, let alone control. He knew he had to force them into a single standard, and he needed a weapon to do it. The mechanism for this control was not built on software, but on a draconian legal contract. Hock addresses the room. If we unify the brand, he proposes, we dictate the terms of acceptance. The regional bankers push back. Why would a merchant agree to take a card from a bank they have never heard of? Hock writes a single phrase on the board: the honour all cards rule. He outlines the ultimatum. We tell the merchants they have a choice. If they want access to the massive, spending middle-class customer base carrying our standard bank card, they must accept any card bearing our logo, regardless of which underlying bank issued it. The bankers realise the leverage they've just invented. It is an all-or-nothing proposition. A merchant cannot pick and choose which bank's card to accept. They are entirely locked into the network's ecosystem. The merchant surrenders their right to negotiate, effectively handing pricing power directly to the newly formed banking syndicate. The foundation for an unstoppable margin capture is set in stone. This is where the reverse Robin Hood protection racket is born. Imagine the government forces you to open a luxury toll road leading directly to your business. The rules state you must charge the exact same toll to every single driver. However, the toll operator decrees that if a driver pulls up in a standard economy car, you pay a $1 tax. If they pull up in a luxury sports car, you must pay a $10 tax to the driver's bank. You are legally forbidden from telling the luxury driver to park elsewhere. To cover the $10 tax, you have no choice but to triple the price of admission for everyone, including the pedestrians who walked there. The mafia does not keep the protection money for themselves. They give 80% of it back to your wealthiest customers as a reward just for walking into your store. The customers think the mafia is a fantastic loyalty program, completely unaware that you had to raise the price of their spaghetti by 3% just to make payroll. This was the genius of the anti-steering provision. It acted as a permanent legal gag order, preventing merchants from telling consumers how much a swipe actually costs the business. For decades, this system operates quietly in the background. Visa and Mastercard grow into global titans, extracting fractions of a penny that accumulate into billions. The banking syndicate enjoys risk-free operating income, audited and approved by the Big Four accounting firms, who view the legally binding contracts as perfectly legitimate. The extraction engine hums without interruption, generating record paper profits year over year. That is, until the summer of 2010, when a sudden regulatory shockwave hits the United States Senate floor and threatens to tear the entire operation down to the studs. The golden age of unregulated swiping was about to face its first real structural threat. July 15, 2010. The Executive Suites at JP Morgan Chase headquarters, 270 Park Avenue, New York. The United States Senate has just passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Tucked inside the sprawling legislation is a late addition from Senator Dick Durbin, an amendment specifically targeting debit card swipe fees. Inside the risk management flaws, the realization hits with absolute panic. The Federal Reserve is going to cap debit fees. Screens flash red across trading desks as banking index futures drop in real time. Compliance officers and quant analysts frantically circulate internal Excel models, projecting the sudden destruction of free checking accounts. The bank is about to lose its most reliable, invisible revenue stream. $14 billion in projected annual debit revenue is wiped out overnight by the stroke of a legislative pen. The era of unchecked debit extraction is dead. For the first time in history, the government has placed a ceiling on the toll road. The panic in the boardroom is palpable. In the aftermath of the vote, Jamie Dimon, the chief executive officer of JP Morgan Chase, makes the banking cartel's position aggressively clear. During a public broadcast, he remarks on the regulatory assault with cold mechanics. If you are a restaurant and you want to say, "I am not going to take debit cards anymore," that is fine. But if you want to take them, you have to pay the toll. Behind closed doors, the executive directive is much more ruthless. The internal conversation shifts immediately. The analysts say, "Debit is dead. The Fed is capping our processing revenue at 21 cents plus 0.05% of the transaction." The executives reply, "Then we stop marketing debit entirely." Congress left credit cards completely untouched. We weaponize credit rewards to recoup the lost billions. The banks do not retreat. They engage in the most aggressive regulatory arbitrage in modern financial history. They funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into the Electronic Payments Coalition, ensuring that closed-door lobbying firms in Washington strictly protect the credit card loophole from ever seeing the Senate floor. The Durbin Amendment tasked the Federal Reserve with capping debit fees to ensure they were reasonable and proportional to the actual cost of processing. Instead of a hard cap reflecting the true cost, which is mere fractions of a penny, the Fed succumbed to banking lobbyists and set the cap at 21 cents. But the true mechanical genius was the pivot to credit. Executive bonuses at institutions like Chase and American Express are directly tied to card member acquisition and portfolio volume. By offering 5 times points on dining and travel, executives trigger immediate dopamine responses in high-net-worth individuals. These points are nothing more than a proprietary, unregulated fiat currency. A bank can devalue the points at any moment, changing the cost of a flight from 50,000 points to 80,000 points, effectively wiping out liabilities off their balance sheet with zero regulatory consequence. They capture billions in risk-free transaction volume while maintaining total control over the payout. The consumer is blinded by the gamification of their personal finances. The progressive lawmakers who normally fight for the working class face a severe, paralyzing conflict of interest. Their own wealthy, highly educated donor bases love their credit card points. Politicians are terrified of being the one who takes away your airline miles. Fear of voter backlash paralyzes systemic reform, allowing the banks to push the credit loophole to its absolute mathematical extreme. If debit was capped, the new strategy demanded the creation of a credit card so heavy, so exclusive, and so expensive to process that it would force retailers to fund the greatest wealth transfer in banking history. They needed a card that consumers would practically beg to carry. 6 years later, the bank found exactly what they were looking for inside a metallurgical manufacturing plant. The transition from plastic to metal would mark the beginning of an era defined by aggressive up-tiering, where the sheer physical weight of a card would dictate the invisible tax levied on the local economy. The true extortion was about to begin. August 21st, 2016. A high-end metallurgical manufacturing facility operating at maximum capacity to supply the digital marketing floors of JP Morgan Chase in New York. The bank launches the Sapphire Reserve Card. The defining feature of this financial instrument is not the 100,000-point sign-up bonus. It is the physical weight of the card itself. Stamped from a proprietary metallic alloy weighing exactly 13 grams, it strikes a table with an audible, heavy thud. Inside the manufacturing plant, the physical stamping machines are literally overheating. The bank runs entirely out of metal due to explosive, viral demand. Millennials are uploading videos of themselves unboxing a credit card as if it were luxury consumer electronics. It is an ego-driven subsidy, and the visual aesthetics are carefully engineered to mask the underlying extraction. The psychological superiority of accessing airport lounges and holding premium metal overrides any class solidarity with the cash-paying public. The trap is perfectly set, and the bank prepares to deploy the most expensive processing tier ever conceived. Gordon Smith, the chief executive of Chase Consumer and Community Banking, watches the staggering acquisition numbers roll in. The bank takes a massive $200 to $300 million loss in the fourth quarter just to pay for the initial points. An analyst asks, how do we justify a $300 million write-down on sign-up bonuses? The executive response is built on pure margin capture. We are not paying for the points. We are acquiring the most lucrative customers on earth, and we are forcing Walmart and local restaurants to foot the bill. Internal strategy dictates that merchants will ultimately pay for these rewards via higher Visa Infinite interchange tiers. The bank assumes the upfront cost, knowing the lifetime value of forcing every merchant in America to pay a 3% tax on these specific consumers will yield exponential, unregulated returns. The network is the enforcer. They lock the merchant in a room, hand the bill to the retailer, and walk away with the basis points. The mechanism mathematically guarantees compliance. This extortion mechanism relies entirely on artificial up-tiering through bank identification number routing. The network rules dictate that interchange fees are not flat. They are dynamically priced based on the tier of the card. A merchant signs an agreement to accept Visa, legally bound by the Honor All Cards rule. The issuing bank wants to attract wealthier clients, so they invent a new tier called Visa Infinite. The network artificially sets the interchange rate for this premium card at a staggering 2.5 to 3%. When the customer swipes their heavy metal card, the point-of-sale terminal reads the first 6 digits. The network automatically identifies the luxury status and routes the transaction through the highest possible pricing tier. The merchant, who operates on a razor-thin 2% profit margin, suddenly loses 3% on that exact transaction. They literally take a net loss on the sale just to process the payment. The system mathematically guarantees that the merchant is penalized precisely because the consumer has a higher net worth. Because of the anti-steering provision embedded in the contract, the merchant is legally prohibited from saying, "Your Visa Infinite card costs me too much. Please use a regular card or pay a surcharge." They must swallow the loss in total silence. To survive, the retailer is forced to raise the baseline price of all goods in the store by 2.5%. The cash-paying customer now pays $102.50 for a $100 item. The wealthy customer pays the same inflated price, but receives $3 in cashback, netting a profit. The system operates flawlessly until the collective financial bleeding of American retailers reaches a breaking point. Exhausted and losing billions, a coalition of merchants decides to strike back, initiating a 19-year legal nightmare that would culminate in a Brooklyn federal courthouse. They aim to tear up the contracts and expose the structural monopoly. The banks believe they can buy their way out of the guillotine, setting the stage for a massive legal showdown. June 25th, 2024. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, located in Brooklyn. The courtroom of Chief Judge Margot K. Brody is tense and stale. Fluorescent lighting hums over heavy mahogany tables lined with high-priced antitrust litigators. On one side sits the legal defense for Visa and Mastercard. On the other, a coalition of exhausted retailers. The banking syndicate believes they have just bought their way out of a sprawling 19-year legal nightmare. They have placed a historic $30 billion settlement on the table. It is designed to look like a massive concession to the public, a white flag raised by the credit card duopoly. The air in the room is thick with the expectation of closure. But as Judge Brody reviews the mechanics of the settlement, she notices the mathematical illusion hiding in the fine print. The banks are not surrendering. They are attempting to execute a highly publicized sleight of hand, offering pennies in temporary relief while violently protecting their core extraction mechanism. The courtroom dialogue shifts from monetary figures to systemic rules. The defense attorneys for the networks present their offer. We are willing to cap credit card fees and roll back interchange rates by 4 basis points for 3 years. This saves merchants $30 billion. Judge Brody systematically dismantles the proposal. She looks at the underlying architecture and states, "The proposed settlement does not adequately address the merchant's core concern. It leaves the network rules that prevent them from steering customers to cheaper payment methods entirely intact." The retailers argue, a 4 basis point drop means nothing if we are still legally gagged by the honour all cards mandate. Judge Brody formally rejects the settlement in her memorandum. She recognises the mirage for what it is, a temporary, microscopic fee reduction that fundamentally preserves the cartel structure. The rejection sends a shockwave through the financial sector. The legal firewall has collapsed, and the network executives are forced to confront a reality they thought they had outspent with a multi-billion-dollar check. The settlement was a calculated distraction. A rollback of 0.04% is irrelevant when the baseline extraction sits at 3%. The entire market capitalization of these networks depends on the anti-steering mandate. If merchants were legally allowed to steer customers, they could program their terminals to display a prompt. This premium rewards card carries a 3% tax. Would you like to switch to a debit card to remove this fee? In a truly free market, the consumer would instantly switch to debit. The premium rewards ecosystem would collapse overnight, and the massive bank margins would evaporate. The networks proposed the $30 billion payout specifically to prevent that single line of code from being written into point-of-sale terminals. It was an insurance policy disguised as an antitrust victory, and the federal judge saw right through the accounting trick. The court recognized that without removing the gag order, the wealth transfer matrix would simply resume its upward extraction the exact moment the 3-year probationary period expired. With the settlement rejected, the banks realize their cartel structure is now exposed to a potential jury trial that could result in structural dismemberment. The threat of total network deregulation looms over Wall Street. If a jury decides to outlaw the honour all cards rule, the golden age of premium credit extraction ends instantly. But while the litigation drags on, the war is already moving away from the courtroom. The largest merchants on earth are tired of waiting for the judicial system to save their operating margins. They realize that the only way to kill a monopoly is to starve it of transaction volume. The battle shifts from legal memorandums to proprietary server farms, as mega retailers begin secretly building their own shadow financial rails. But the banks are not standing still. A new, far more predatory extraction loophole is already infecting the checkout counter. This mutation operates entirely in the blind spot of consumer protection agencies, proving that the ecosystem of systemic wealth transfer never dies. It simply finds a new host. Present day, Bentonville, Arkansas. Inside the windowless, hyper-cooled server farms of the global headquarters for Walmart. Telemetry data scrolls across massive dashboards, routing millions of digital payments through the Walmart Pay application. Retail margin is considered sacrosanct in this building. The executives are tired of bleeding billions in basis points to Visa and Mastercard. They are reviewing the latest transaction logs from their closed-loop quick response code payment system. The screens show millions of transactions successfully bypassing the traditional card networks entirely. Instead of paying a 3% toll, the payments are routing directly through the automated clearinghouse, costing the retailer virtually nothing. The war has escalated from the Senate floor to proprietary technology. The mega retailers have initiated a retailer revolt, quietly starving the beast by cutting the networks out of the data flow. Every bypassed swipe is a direct blow to the banking syndicate's revenue stream. The physical metal cards are being rendered utterly useless against the closed-loop digital wallets engineered by the retail giants. The realization in Bentonville is cold, calculated, and mathematically absolute. Doug McMillon, the chief executive of Walmart, pushes a narrative that defines modern retail survival. During strategy meetings, the directive is uncompromising. Every basis point given to a network is a basis point stolen from our operating margin. A financial engineer presents the closed-loop data. If we incentivize the customer to link their checking account directly to our application, we bypass the Visa Infinite up-tiering entirely. We keep the 3%. The executive response is swift. Then we build the shadow network. We create our own rails. The retailers understand that they can no longer rely on the federal government to cap swipe fees through the Credit Card Competition Act. Lobbying dollars have stalled legislative reform, so the merchants are engineering their way out of the extortion. But as they build their defenses, a new threat enters the market. The banking syndicate has already financed a shadow interchange network designed to extract even higher fees from the merchants. The exact same mechanism of forced extraction is currently mutating through buy now, pay later firms like Affirm, Klarna, and Afterpay. While traditional networks extract 2 to 3%, these shadow interchange providers charge merchants upwards of 4 to 8% to process a transaction. The loophole remains mathematically identical. The providers demand absolute price parity. The merchant is contractually barred from charging a customer more if they use Klarna instead of cash. The merchant is forced to swallow a devastating 6% loss, raise retail prices across the board to survive, and watch as the non-debt consumer subsidizes the installment plans of the app user. The regulatory framework has entirely failed to classify this extraction as an interchange equivalent. It allows a new, more predatory cartel to flourish completely unchecked in the blind spot of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The architecture of the extortion is perfectly replicated, using modern software interfaces to execute the exact same legal gag order D. Hock invented over 50 years ago. This is the true danger of the modern financial architecture. The extraction is never destroyed. It is simply repackaged into a sleek, gamified interface. The moment regulators attempt to cap one stream of revenue, the banking syndicate immediately engineers a shadow network to replace it, passing the hidden tax back down to the unbanked and the cash-dependent. The system relies entirely on your ignorance of the mechanism. If you do not understand how the basis points flow, you will always be the one subsidizing the luxury of the people at the top. The cycle of extraction is legally binding, and the inflation it causes is permanent. The bill always comes due, and the house never takes the loss. To survive this ecosystem, you must map the incentives and track the legal loopholes before they are executed at the terminal. Subscribe to Capital Curriculum and join the few who understand the underlying math of the economy. Because the next time you stand at the checkout counter, remember, your rewards are not free. You are just forcing someone else to pay the toll.